When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Greasecom YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be ranking every episode from House of the Dragon 1 through 18. This was very difficult for me to do, given I haven't seen season 1 in like a little bit of time now, about 3 or 4 months, since the last time I basically rewatched it for season 2. And I went back through my notes for what I had for season 1 and went through kind of looking through the episodes. And I've come to kind of figure out where I think each episode is. I think there's some really hard placements more towards the middle. I think the top and the bottom are pretty easy for me, but the middle was quite difficult. So I definitely think there could be some variety in the ways you guys think about some things. Also, I think with season 2, I had some different opinions than maybe you guys did, so you might have some different opinions. Let me know how you would rank the 18 episodes, or maybe your favorites and maybe you're not so much your favorites. But yeah, but before we get into the video, if you did want to become a Patreon or a member, you do get all of my videos early. As soon as I upload them to YouTube, they go straight to you instead of having to wait till whenever the scheduled day is. So for instance, I usually have all my videos pretty much done by Tuesday or Wednesday. So you usually get them almost days earlier than when they come out. But yeah, and also thank you to those people that do support me on there. So let's start at number 18, Season 2, Episode 8. And yeah, I think that the finale for House of the Dragon Season 2 is the worst episode of House of the Dragon. Not only is it the worst episode of its season, but in totality. This episode was quite disappointing in terms of being a finale. It kind of broke, in my opinion, multiple characters. It was filled with illogical sequences. I don't want to kind of harp on this too much because I felt like I've talked about this episode for like all week now, and I've been constantly talking about some of my issues with it. So if you do want to check out more of my issues, I would check out streams and some of my videos out this week. But I was just not a big fan of the handling of Daemon and Alicent's plot line in this episode, and really kind of impacted how I viewed the rest of the season. So I think it failed as a finale, and I also think it failed as an episode as well. Number 17. This is also a very controversial because a lot of people actually liked Season 2, Episode 7. So that is my number 17. I was not a fan. I did not like the way some of the things were done in terms of the sewing, the logic behind like Rhaenyra, for some reason, just sending everybody out to basically be burned alive. That didn't make any sense in terms of Rhaenyra's character. There was a lot of filler in this episode in terms of like Alicent's plot line where she's just on a camping trip. You can almost completely just skip those scenes and nothing changes. You had some kind of interesting stuff with Daemon, but then it doesn't really make sense that Daemon's being kind of bossed around by this kid. And I like Oscar Tully's performance, but again, it basically has the same issue that this entire season had for Daemon, where he's just doing nothing. Like, he just doesn't do anything. There's no character development that like is concluded with either this episode or the next episode. Again, was not a big fan of episode 7, and that's why it's down here. Number 16, I have Season 2, Episode 3. So this is a tough one because I think majority of this episode, like maybe like 60% of this episode is actually pretty good in terms of like setup and, you know, the fallout from the twins attack, basically the Cargylls in episode 2. It's pretty decent episode up until the last 10 minutes. Rhaenyra and Alicent's conversation, the way it's executed in terms of how Rhaenyra even gets to Alicent is just wild to me. The logic that you have to make for justifying Rhaenyra even going there in the first place is completely weird to me. It just doesn't make any sense. Rhaenyra and Alicent having a conversation in episode 3 also just didn't make any sense given that they talk at the end of the season, which could have been actually a good idea given the fact that those two characters would have been separated by an entire season. But here it kind of rings hollow because they were only separated by like 5 episodes, like half a season. None of the characters had grown by that point. These characters are still kind of the same. And yeah, they had a really sloppily executed finish to this episode that also in the same point didn't really make any sense to begin with. So, wasn't a big fan in terms of the ending of episode 3, which is kind of why it's down here. So, number 15, you guys might be getting tired of me talking about Season 2. Unfortunately, Season 2 to me was much worse than Season 1. And so, you have episodes like Episode 5 of Season 2 as my number 15. And this is, by definition, the episode of straight build-up and filler. Not much happens in this episode outside of, like, the fallout of Rook's Rest. So, You have the small folk plot, which some people bought into, some people didn't, in terms of Melee's head being paraded throughout the streets. You're starting to see kind of the people starting to flip on the Greens as they kind of viewed the dragons as gods, and they're believing that Rhaenyra is going to come and destroy them. And so you're seeing that plot start to unravel, even though it doesn't really have, like, there's no real conclusion to that until episode 6. So this is just straight up build up, and a lot of people, I think it's like split on episode 5 on if you really believed that how that went down. Some people do, some people don't. Kind of all over the place. You even have in this episode, like, the major thing is the Dragon Seeds plot, but it's kind of weird in terms of how they start it with, like, Jace and Rhaenyra, where they're like, yeah, we can just look in the records. That's where we're going to find all these people with Targaryen blood. It was just a weird finish, a weird episode, a weird, just like, I don't know, filler episode. It didn't really have anything that kind of packed that punch. And even in the filler episodes of, like, say, season 1, they had more that moved the plot along while also being good character development episodes as well, or setup episodes. And so this episode in terms of season 2 is pretty, like, mid, but when you put into perspective season 1 and season 2, it's pretty low for me. Number 14, I have season 1, episode 3. So I think the issue with this episode, and this is the Stepstones episode, so you had to condense the plot of Fire and Blood into 10 episodes before the dance. And by doing that, you kind of have some issues. So in one part of it, you have the Daemon plot. The other part of it, you have, like, the Rhaenyra and the hunt with Viserys plot line. And whereas I think the Rhaenyra plot line is actually pretty good in the episode, like showing her how she feels kind of like that she's being put aside because of Aegon, and everybody asking, you know, is Aegon going to be the king, and people trying to kind of, you know, marry into her, like Jason Lannister offers to marry her and all that stuff. So a lot of that kind of works pretty well in this episode. Like, even the symbolism with the White Hart coming to Rhaenyra and Viserys having to kill this stag that's basically just, like, already trapped. It's not really anything that's that cool or anything. It's actually really creepy and disturbing. And so it all really works well. You also have, like, Alicent and Larys kind of meeting for the first time in this episode. So there's a lot of cool stuff with, like, that plot. But where this plot falls apart to me is just the Daemon plot. I mean, you just have really stupid stuff happening. Like, a lot of my major complaints with Daemon in season 1 can really be summed up with just this episode. You know, he beats a messenger because he doesn't like that Viserys is coming to help him. He, you know, goes into trying to beat the crab feeder with just, like, one guy, and he's going to basically go through an entire battlefield, and he doesn't get killed somehow. And it's just really weird. I think there's some issues with the Battle of the Stepstones just in general, and I was just not that big of a fan. It was my least favorite episode of season 1. Number 13, I don't remember how much, like, criticism I got for this placement back in season 1 because it's just been a long time, so I don't really know how the community gauges this episode. But number 13 I had as episode 9 of season 1, and so a lot of you guys might be kind of surprised by that, given that episode 9 is, you know, right before the finale of season 1. It's supposed to be the big episode. And this episode, to me, I didn't really like on a lot of different plot points. Whereas I still think it's better than season 1, episode 3, because it just has higher stakes and you're much more involved in what's going on. I have a number of problems with it. Episode 9 is really where Alicent's character starts to deviate from what was being set up for her the entire season. We have the Viserys dies, which is the big plot point of the episode, and you have Alicent, you know, hearing in the last episode that she, you know, she believes that Aegon is the one that Viserys wants on the throne. And so she's sitting here and she doesn't want to go into, like, violence and war with Rhaenyra, but at the same time, she's been propping up Aegon to be ruler the whole time. And so she acts really surprised that, like, these people are trying to put Aegon on the throne. Like, it just feels really weird. It feels like a very forced, like, split between the Greens, where you have, like, Alicent versus Otto and trying to get control of Aegon. I just find that plot to be dragged on and really not that interesting to me. While also then at the very end of the episode, you basically have the destruction of Rhaenys' character. And you also have this issue where it basically goes against everything George, you know, writes. Like, we have this glorification of Rhaenys, there's heroic music playing, and it's just, she just killed hundreds of innocent civilians, And then she also could have killed the Greens, but didn't. And it just doesn't make any sense. So, like, episode 9 is better than some of the episodes below it because it has a lot more importance. It has a lot more, like, stakes to it. But I think there's a lot of issues with episode 9. And I think a lot of those issues actually kind of creep up into season 2. So because of the way that they went with season 2 kind of also hurts this episode a little bit, in my opinion. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about episode 9, season 1. I think it's a weird placement to me. Number 12, I have season 1, episode 6. So this episode has a really tough job, and you can really feel the time skips in this episode. We go from the young Rhaenyra and young Alicent to now we're in the future. So we have new characters, we have new cast, and you have to introduce all these things. So there's a lot of different plots all happening at the same time. You feel Rhaenyra is starting to get boxed in, right? You know, Alicent is basically turning the court against her. And you also see that the Strong plot line going on. She's been having a relationship with Harwin Strong. So we kind of have to really introduce who that character is because House of the Dragon didn't do it really in the first 5 episodes. You've got to introduce that plot line. You've got to introduce, you know, Rhaenyra's kids, Alicent's kids. You've got to then, you know, have this idea where Rhaenyra tries to make this peace with Alicent, but then Alicent rejects it. And so you have a lot of different ideas coming on, like how are Laenor and Rhaenyra's marriage going? Where is Viserys at this point? Like, his condition is much worse after this time skip from episode 5 to episode 6. Just a lot of things going on in this episode. This episode, I think, on a rewatch, feels kind of bloated because of how much needs to be told to the audience so that they can understand what happened in between episode 5 and 6. And that's why it's this low to me. I don't think it's a bad episode. I think it does a lot of things really well in terms of introducing certain ideas and themes and plots. And so for that, I think it's better than episode 9 because episode 9 does things just much worse than episode 6 does. Like episode 6, the only problem episode 6 has is just it throws a lot of stuff at you very quickly. Number 11, just outside of my top 10, I put season 1, episode 1. I wasn't sure about this episode because I do think it's a great introduction into the story of House of the Dragon and the dance. But at the same time, I feel like its significance is, I think, a lot lesser than most of the episodes above it. It doesn't have like that huge moment that most of the episodes going forward are going to have, or it doesn't have like insane character work. Like it does in some regards, but because this is the opening episode, we have to spend about a little bit of time with each of our main characters. So Rhaenyra and Alicent get a bit of screen time together because they're, you know, friends now, and Alicent's been aged down. You've got to introduce Viserys. You've even got to do like at the beginning, you have the Jaehaerys stuff at the Great Council. You've got to have, you know, Daemon be introduced. Criston Cole's kind of introduced in this episode. Otto and Daemon's rivalry is introduced. Like, there's a lot of things. Again, it's kind of the same issues of episode 6 in season 1, where you have a lot of stuff you've got to put in there, and it's not as good as Game of Thrones. It's not as done as well, but it's still really good. Like Emma Arryn's like death is tragic in this episode. You know, mixing her, you know, dying in, you know, the bed and trying to give birth, while then also you see like in the tourney, you know, that battles going on and stuff like that. It's really well done, really edited well. And so I really do like a lot of things in episode 1. I just think in terms of stakes and in terms of, you know, what we actually get in the episode, I think it pales in comparison to most of the episodes above it. Entering our top 10, back to season 2, I have episode 1 of season 2. I think this episode is just a middle-of-the-pack good episode for House of the Dragon. Like, if you look at season 1, I think pretty much every episode in season 1, outside of like 2, are like an 8 out of 10 or above. So in my regard, episode 1 of season 2 is just kind of there in the middle. I think it was a really good episode up until Blood and Cheese. And so Blood and Cheese to me was really disappointing. It was good enough for the casual audience. It did what it needed to be done. And I don't think it was like anything horrible like we see like in episode 8, for instance. But I just don't think it really packed that punch that it could have. As me, a book reader, you know, knowing what Blood and Cheese is, I don't think it ever hit those heights. And so I think it was a good start to season 2, right? I gave this episode an 8 out of 10. I just don't think it really got to that next point, didn't get to that next level. And I think this episode really, when you look back on it, was the episode that could have been one of the best of the entire series. but it just missed that opportunity. It just missed going a little higher. Number 9, I have season 1, episode 10, and I really struggled with where to put this episode. I thought maybe this could get one more higher, be number 8, but I thought I kind of went back and forth on it. The finale of season 1 is really weird because there's a lot of great moments, like really high moments that are awesome to watch on a rewatch, and some things I've come around on. I'm a little bit more positive on episode 10. But there's also things in there that just, you can now tell on a rewatch where they're going with it, and it hurts it. And even when I watched it for the first time, I saw some things that I didn't really like in this episode. So one of them is Daemon choking Rhaenyra. It just feels like it comes out of nowhere. It feels like something that didn't need to be there, and was just to make the audience hate Daemon. Wasn't a big fan of that, and even came out after like that season drop that was the case, that they just wanted Daemon to be hateable. They didn't expect people to like him at all. And that's very apparent in this episode in multiple scenes. I also found that the idea that Otto Hightower goes to Dragonstone to try and make a peace is just insane. Like, if you like the logic there is just wild, because if I was somebody in the Green Council, I'd be thinking, yeah, Otto's gonna die. Daemon is literally Otto's biggest enemy. Daemon has been displaced from multiple like seats on the council in favor from Viserys, specifically by Otto Hightower. Daemon believes that Otto Hightower basically killed Viserys. And Rhaenyra also as well. How is she going to be feeling about this? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, like especially on a rewatch, as to why Otto wasn't imprisoned. It makes zero sense in terms of the blacks. And so I wasn't a big fan of that. But there's some other stuff, right, as to why this episode is higher up, is Rhaenyra's coronation is one of the best scenes of season 1. It has so much emotion and weight to it. And I really love that scene. I think a lot of the Black Council stuff, you know, preparing for the next season. I even think where this season ends, the shot of Rhaenyra when she learns about Luke's death, is still haunting. Emma Darcy's acting is so good in that scene. And it's so frustrating to rewatch that scene and now look at season 2 and go, where was that? You know, it felt like we were teased for something more. And so I'm trying not to damage that episode because of season 2, but you do have to watch it and go, okay, but then in season 2, this isn't there. So I don't know. I'm back and forth on episode 10 because there's a lot of great moments. Like, even I've come around on like how Aemond kills Luke, or I guess it's just Vhagar kills Luke. That's a really emotional scene. Some of the scenes between Luke and Rhaenyra in this last episode are fantastic. Even like the way they did the war table, I really loved in this episode as it's kind of introduced here. A lot of stuff to like in the finale of season 1. Just some other stuff that I think is questionable and maybe not as good. Number 8, I have season 2, episode 6. Yeah, and this is another, I think, divisive episode, right? This is the one that got review bombed to death. IMDb had this, I think, as the lowest episode of the season. Now, part of that's because of review bombing, but whatever. I think this episode was actually really good. This episode was really good at, I think, a character focus more than anything. But we see a lot of different things occurring, right? You have Rhaenyra putting into effect, like, the whole Dragon Seed plot. We see how that gets Sir Steffon Darkling killed. That's a really emotional moment. You see as Rhaenyra seems to not be trusting people around her as much and stuff like that. And so I think that this episode does a really good job of kind of driving our characters forward a little bit. Even the King's Landing plot, where you see Alicent and Helena getting ambushed because the public has just turned against them. Rhaenyra and Mysaria do this plan that's still a little fluky to me. I don't know how much I buy into that, but you see basically the public turning against the Greens as Aemond is also trying to take control, as he basically takes Alicent completely out of power, removes her from the small council. It's kind of the rise of Aemond as a villain, more or less, in this episode. We also kind of see Aemond threatening Aegon with, you know, if you say something, I'm going to kill you, more or less. A lot of good writing in terms of that. You also see in this episode Daemon, and he gets flashbacks of Viserys. It's always great to see Viserys. And I do kind of look at a lot of Daemon's plot now, and I kind of look back and I go, yeah, that basically doesn't result in anything, but it's still good to look back on and see those scenes just for Viserys. And so I do think, like, part of season 2 is, like, if they had fulfilled Daemon's arc correctly, I think this episode would have been much higher. But because I don't love the way that they ended out the character of Daemon, this episode falls down a bit to number 8. Number 7, I have Season 1, Episode 5. This one's also kind of controversial. I think a lot of these are going to be controversial, especially in the middle, but Episode 5 is kind of notorious for 2 scenes. One is Alicent's green dress scene, which is by far my second favorite scene of the entire season, and even, I would say, even House of the Dragon. I think it's right up there with Viserys' moment in Episode 8, and this is where we see, again, the entire young Alicent play out, right? Where Alicent and Rhaenyra's relationship has slowly become more and more strained. They're growing even more divided. And Alicent also finding out from Cole that Rhaenyra lied to her, that she did actually sleep with somebody. It really is the defining moment for Alicent that she's turned against Rhaenyra, and she's now going to start working in her own interests, because Otto Hightower, what did he tell her, right? That Rhaenyra is going to have your kids killed because they pose a threat to her claim. And so that trust has now been broken. It's the natural way that Alicent then takes that and goes forward. And so I love a lot of what they did with Alicent in the early part of Season 1, and I think this is really the climax of Alicent in Season 1 for me. So I really like that part of it. Now, where is the bad part of it? Why is it not higher? I just gave all that praise to that moment. Well, you have Criston Cole in this episode. And Criston Cole is just an unlikable and just a very bad character in Season 1. And he ruins this episode, in my opinion. Like, he doesn't make it like it's a bad episode, but instead of this episode being like in my top 5, it's kind of lower because of Criston Cole killing Joffrey in the middle of the wedding. Joffrey does not attack him, doesn't do anything. He's provoking him, but, you know, and kills him. Somebody that is the companion of Laenor, and there's no repercussions to this. It's an obvious plot hole. It doesn't make sense. And it takes this idea that, oh, it's a wedding, so something bad's gotta happen. And it's like, it should have been the Alicent thing. That's the bad moment. Rhaenyra has made an enemy now for life. But no, there had to be some sort of blood or death. And it just took away from the moment. It kind of takes you out of the episode a little bit, in my opinion. And so I think it's a good episode, but I think it could have been so much better if just one scene was removed. Number 6, I have Season 1, Episode 7. So Episode 7 is quite a big episode. It is just a huge episode in terms of we see everybody kind of going to Driftmark because Laena has died. And it's basically a funeral It's basically a funeral episode. But what do we have here? We have all of our characters in one place. And so what ends up happening? A lot of things happen. Well, Rhaenyra starts to feel, because in the last episode, in Episode 6, she ends up moving to Dragonstone because she feels like she's being kicked out, more or less, and that nobody is on her side at court. And so she's tired of all that stuff. And so we see her back here, and she knows that she needs more power. She needs legitimacy, right? She needs all those things. She can't fight the Greens on her own. And so it's about her relationship with Laenor and all the problems that that's caused. And it's her wanting to go with Daemon because it gives her not only legitimacy, but it also gives her more power with Caraxes and also Daemon as a warrior and as a leader. And so there's a lot of that going on here. There's a lot of political intrigue going on, but we're also seeing what was set up in Episode 6, the hatred between the two factions in terms of the kids, the next generation hating each other. And that all comes to a climax when Aemond claims Vhagar, and he also loses his eye. A lot of tension here, some big moments that are awesome. And so we see a lot of that going on. And then we also see the tensions growing as Alicent tries to kill Rhaenyra, basically. A lot of that stuff is really great here. The problem with the episode, again, and this is what plagued all of Season 1. I've talked about this in lengths, right leading up to Season 2. This is the one thing I wanted them to improve. Is this episode, like Episode 5, I just got done talking about, ends on a very controversial moment that still has no answers even to now. Laenor's just disappearance type thing is just weird. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Why don't you just kill him off or do any of those things? Because now Seasmoke has a Seasmoke will need a rider in Season 2, but again, Laenor's still alive, and they don't even explain any of that in Season 2, so it looks even worse in Season 1. So again, A lot of these episodes in season 1 are held back a lot of the times by that last moment. And that's even true in the best episode, I think, of House of the Dragon. So there it is. Number 5, I have season 2, episode 4. Outside of the Stepstones, this is really the only battle we've seen on screen. It's the only time we've seen dragon fighting dragon, and it was done really well. I think it's definitely a top 5 episode of the entire series. I think Rhaenys and, the way that character goes about, even though Rhaenys is not a good character in the show, the way she goes out is really well done. Aegon's entire plot where he feels like he's not being respected and he wants to live up to Aegon the Conqueror and being a good king and all these things, and that pushes him to go to Rook's Rest, which ends up getting him killed. But then you see also that the revelation of the last episode, right, of Aemond being caught with the prostitute that he was with and being teased by Aegon, it leads Aemond to more or less springing his trap, but also springing that trap onto his brother Aegon and almost killing him. All of that's great, right? The visuals are great. The sound design is great. The music is beautiful in the episode. I think all that's great. Even Daemon's plot in this episode is pretty well done. I think a pretty solid episode. I think it doesn't hit the emotional weight for me as other episodes do above it, because this episode is a battle and Rhaenys is like our primary protagonist, I guess, in this battle. And she just is not a good character in this show, unfortunately. Like, I like the actress. I love that she gives a great performance, but the material she was given wasn't great. And episode 9 basically destroyed her character, which is why episode 9 is kind of lower on this list. But I think Aegon, to me, carries the emotion of this episode and still deserves top 5, but I won't put it any higher than that. Number 4, I have season 1, episode 2. I love this episode for a lot of different reasons. So this episode, again, follows Rhaenyra. She's been named the heir. And so you see her relationship with Alicent. But Alicent, at the same time, is being basically provoked or basically made to try and seduce Viserys by Otto. And so you see that like ripple in that relationship as it's starting to crumble. You're seeing that that's going to break. And every scene that plays on where, Viserys is, in kind of a boxed in situation. Everybody says he needs to marry Laena, but Laena's this little girl. He doesn't want to marry her. And, he feels like he wants to do what he wants to do finally for once. He wants to take Alicent because Alicent seems understanding. He's attracted to her, and he wants to do all those things. And so Viserys acts out. He kind of does what Daemon does. He pulls a Daemon. He does what he wants to do, but because that decision is made, it fractures that relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent that never will truly heal. It's that one thing that breaks them apart. And I want to say, just on rewatching some of the season and all that, Millie Alcock's acting when she realizes that Alicent, is going to marry her father is some of the best facial acting of the entire show. And I've always said the casting, the acting of this show has been great, and that really is on full display in terms of Viserys, in terms of Rhaenyra, in terms of Alicent, in terms of Otto, even Daemon at the end of the episode as he's plotting with Corlys to go to the Stepstones, and kind of that intermingled into their conversation at the very end of the episode. There's a lot to love in this episode. I really do like a lot of the things here. I think the only reason it doesn't get into the top 3 is because it doesn't reach the heights that I think the next 3 episodes reach in terms of emotional value towards the characters that are in the episode. But I think a very strong episode to me. And let's move on to number 3. So my top 3, my best episode of season 2, episode 2 of season 2. I think this episode, from beginning to end, is really well done. I think the after effect of Blood and Cheese, how that affects Aegon, where he starts lashing out at people, where that eventually is going to lead to Otto Hightower being removed as Hand of the King, probably the best scene of season 2. Beautiful acting by both actors who play Otto and also Aegon. That's beautiful of what's going on there. In terms of Rhaenyra's plot, the kind of reaction to how she's being slandered as Rhaenyra the Cruel, and her breaking of her relationship with Daemon as he goes off to go to Harrenhal, and, they basically have a breakup in this episode. The walls are kind of boxing in on Rhaenyra, And so that also prompts Aegon to do something really rash. He turns to Criston Cole in his kind of darkest hour. And this basically has the main theme of the entire war. Brothers going against brothers, these horrible crimes being committed by both sides. And basically, we have the Cargill twins battle for the end of this episode right in front of Rhaenyra. You feel the tension as the two battle it out, and they end up more or less killing each other. More or less is kind of how it works, but the suicide right in front of Rhaenyra's eyes is horrifying. The emotion is just beautiful. And like I kind of talked about with some of the other ones in this top 5, this episode to me is only outdone because I feel more emotion, and I feel that the other episodes are hitting higher heights. But I do think, as in terms of season 2, I've given a lot of criticism to season 2. Again, I have 4 of the 8 episodes as the bottom 4 of my list. But this episode was everything that this season should have been. It had great character development, great character building. It had tense moments. It forwarded the plot quite a lot. It was just a great episode to really stand out season 2. Number 2, I have season 1, episode 4. So for me, I only had 3 episodes in season 1 that I gave a 9 to, but that, I mean, comparatively to season 2, that's pretty good. But this episode, so it follows after the Stepstone episode. So you have Daemon coming back, and the tension that you feel when Daemon re-enters King's Landing, as you're not sure what he's going to do, but he does end up giving up his crown to Viserys. Viserys and Daemon seem to be back in their good graces, and you see Alicent. I think Alicent is, in my opinion, the spotlight of this episode. And I talk a lot about, I love Alicent in season 1, especially from episode 1 to 8. She is a great character, and you feel how kind of alone she feels. You know, one of her best conversations in the episode is actually with Rhaenyra, because Rhaenyra at this point is kind of being told she needs to find somebody to marry, and she's being paraded around kind of the country. And Alicent is sitting here, you know, jealous of Rhaenyra in a lot of ways. Rhaenyra is out here complaining about her status of trying to marry and not wanting to just be somebody's breeding woman, more or less. And here's Alicent, who was forced into this role by her father. She's not finding any enjoyment in her marriage. She's having to, you know, be the mother to children at a very young age. And Alicent feels completely caged in, whereas Rhaenyra is the opposite. Rhaenyra is allowed to get away with these things, and you see the differences between those characters are really spotlighted in this episode. I love the way that episode 4 is able to really do that. And so then you also see Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship kind of take it to that next level, as Rhaenyra and him are, you know, going around the streets, and they end up kind of in like a brothel, I guess, area, and it seems like they're going to get it on, but then Daemon stops because he's basically grooming Rhaenyra at this point, and so that forces Rhaenyra to go to Criston Cole. And we have the big point of this episode is, can Alicent trust Rhaenyra? Because by the end of this episode, we're going to see that Rhaenyra is going to be forced to marry Laenor, and this great scenes with either Viserys and Rhaenyra or Viserys and Daemon. The acting's fantastic by Patty, and we see that Rhaenyra gets Otto kicked out of Hand of the King. Now, it's not as done as well in terms of the dismissal of the Hand of the King as it is, I think, in season 2. I think Aegon's is actually better, but I think throughout this entire episode, just really great in terms of the emotion from almost all the different characters going on. The plot, to me, and in the, you know, the first half of the season is at its highest. I love a lot of the things they did with this episode. I think it's just outdone because of Patty's performance in the next episode that I'll have as number 1. But I think episode 4, great episode. Number 1 to me has to be season 1, episode 8. And so this follows directly after Laena's funeral in that episode, and we see Rhaenyra coming back to King's Landing. This entire episode is driven on the idea of, should Luke inherit after Corlys dies? Because it seems like Corlys is going to die. Who should going to inherit? Should it be Baela or Rhaena? Should it be Rhaenys? Should it be Vaemond? Should it be Luke? That's the central core idea of this episode. And why is this important? Because it's almost like a proxy war between Alicent and Rhaenyra, the Greens and the Blacks. Because Alicent is trying to use this to prove, or I guess Alicent and Otto, to prove that the Greens, or to prove that Rhaenyra's children are illegitimate. It smears her reputation, it damages her claim to the throne, and so it's kind of a proxy war. They're using Vaemond as this idea to undercut Rhaenyra. And so the premise of the episode is already fantastic, right? And so they take some beautiful acting performances between pretty much everybody in the cast, as you're seeing Rhaenyra and Daemon come back to the capital after a while. They haven't been there in a couple episodes. You're seeing as, Viserys is on his last leg and, being introduced to Rhaenyra and Daemon's children. It's really heartbreaking to see this as Rhaenyra is pleading to her father, basically crying as she doesn't know what to do. She feels completely boxed in once again, like she did earlier on in episode 7. And so you have everything kind of come to the heights of it, right? Because Rhaenyra seems like she's going to lose this and it's going to be really bad for her. Vaemon's going to get his way. But then we get the best scene of House of the Dragon. Viserys comes in, using all the strength left on him to protect Rhaenyra one last time. The heartbreaking moments that you see, even when Viserys, in a not a actually planned thing, I guarantee you most of you know this, but Viserys' crown was not meant to fall off and Daemon picking it up. That was totally something that just happened by Matt Smith. He just took the initiative and did it. And it's one of the most beautiful scenes in this show. It's number one for me for that reason. And even the feast scene that they have directly after this, where you can feel the tension in the room. You can feel both sides. It just feels like at any moment, the drop of a coin could set everything off. And all it takes after Viserys leaves is he believes, yes, I've finally done it. I've created peace between the two sides of my family as Jace and Helaena are dancing and all this stuff. And it all flips as soon as he leaves, as Aemon does his speech and sets it off. And you have some of the great moments where it's like Daemon and Aemon basically eyeing each other up and all that. And, you have some great moments. And I think the only thing that hurts this episode is the very end. The Aegon's dream thing, the thing that seems to turn Alicent to putting Aegon on the throne, a change that I think was not very good and had very big effects on the episodes to come. But I think that just can't undercut how beautiful this episode was. Viserys dies in this episode as well. Again, the best performance, in my opinion, of the entire show. And yeah, that is my list. Let me know what you guys think. I think for me, this is the most accurate list I could probably do based off of how I grade episodes. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.